Yeah, it seems fine. Hey, everybody, welcome back. It's been a while since I recorded one of these, but this is the next season of AI Unleashed, which is, season one was all about how are people coping with the AI revolution and basically people buying software licenses and not really changing what they're doing, but, waxing lyrically about the societal impact of things whilst being uncertain about how to change the things in their organization and be responsible about what they're deploying and workforce redesign and all of these things were basically still emerging when we were doing the first season. So the second season is now, and basically the agentic revolution is in full swing. So nearly every day we have a new release of something in the space of Claude or Gemini. Managed agents is the latest thing of today, not today, but this week. So we're getting a lot of change in that space, and really everything's moving towards agentic. But not to forget, of course, we have automation, orchestration, systems, and all of this stuff, which needs to happen when we're embedding some of this stuff into organizations. So we got that whole thing. And one of the, it's exciting today because one of the people that I've been talking with this about for pretty much the last 2 years is Yousaf, who is joining us for this inaugural episode of season two. So welcome, Yousaf.
Yeah, thank you very much. Glad to be the one kicking off season two. It can only go one way from here. Let's be honest. It's only going to go up from here for season two. So start low, set the bar low, set the expectations low, and I'm sure season two.
Amazing. And yeah, thanks for, joining me in this. So you're one of the few people in the market, in my circle of trust, in the thought leadership space, in the uh, let's say not necessarily L&D, but in the AI and agentic space, who is interfacing with organizations much like I am and having these kinds of conversations and trying to steer the ship and getting involved in strategic thinking and also getting involved in deployment. Lots of folks out there are just doing the big thinking and the talking and not doing any of the building. We're both in that space where we are doing the building. So if we take what I've just said, the sort of trajectory from orchestration and automation through to what we're seeing emerging in the agentic market, where are you seeing the big questions? Where are you seeing the big deployments? Where are you seeing the interest from the organizations that you're working with?
So again, something that we've discussed in the past, but number one, a bit of a neutral answer is it kind of varies by the organization, the industry, the size. And that kind of stuff has always existed within the traditional software and tooling market. Large enterprises had much longer buying cycles. Change management was a big thing. IT, infrastructure, adoption, getting sponsorship was a huge thing. And it would take months and months and months, if not years, to even pilot a tech solution before you've even began rolling it out. If it's a global solution, you've then got things like data passports and adoption triggers and all of those kind of things. But on the other side, you had Y Combinator, startup companies, scale-ups, much more agile companies that can almost just make the best decision based on the available data that they have as of today and where their goals are and what they see on the market, right? So you've got agility, speed, adaptability, and a more of a cushion from a risk point of view for things to go wrong versus the huge enterprises, which that's all the market really speaks about in terms of targeting these solutions too. But those conversations happen at a much slower pace. Those delivery mechanisms take a much longer time, and they've got far less of a cushion from a risk, compliance, auditability point of view and those kind of things. I think it's very similar, but slightly more enhanced now when we're talking about AI-enabled software, AI-native software, agents, automations, and those kind of things. And there's almost like a 5-pillar adoption. I don't like calling it adoption or maturity, but those are just the words that the industry loves. But effectively, you've got level 0, as I call it, is as people are joining or getting into the lift, is do we have an environment and an infrastructure which is already conducive to people leveraging the best tools available to them in order to succeed in their work, produce, and be productive. Level 1 becomes kind of where AI then enters the elevator, or level 1 on the skyscraper that we're going up. Is then all around kind of like I love this concept of single player tools.
Yeah.
So this is what most organizations have now done with Copilot or Teams or enterprise licenses to Claude, Gemini, or ChatGPT, OpenAI. And this is effectively what can one person do with a new set of tools, and where can they take it, and how can their performance or capabilities enhance as a direct result of that. But it's a very one-to-one type relationship. The next level above that is then single player processes. And these are things like very repeatable workflows that one person does or a set of individuals do. But again, you kind of own the workflow end to end. So the most recent example I was talking to someone about this was accounts receivables, or like the accounts team or the finance team within an organization. You've usually got someone who's on accounts receivables or payables, and all they effectively do is process and file invoices, send invoices, chase for late payments, maybe reconcile or review some documents. Now, that's not to knock any finance people. You know, we all love our finance colleagues across the world, but these are jobs that just a single person could do. There isn't really any large handoffs or triggers or anything like that. It's a fairly single player game that they're playing. So at those points, when you talk about things like automation and talk about agentic workforces and those kind of things, that's like the simplest entry point. And again, automation is nothing new, as we know. Zapier and those kind of softwares have lived for a long time, but it's almost like now they're cool and popular again. It just used to be the nerds and the engineers that used to play around with this kind of stuff and, you know, building custom apps and workflows.
Yeah.
Now it's like everybody's got it in their hands. So then when you take a single player, single process type methodology and you think, right, okay, so we want to automate some of what Andy does because it's so repetitive. There isn't really any nuance or any judgment outside of process and policy that needs to be adhered to. This is something that we can start adopting. And these are fairly low-hanging fruits for, I think, a lot of businesses. But I still think a lot of businesses are operating at this stage in April 2026, as we stand right now. The next level above that then becomes multiplayer single function processes, which is now there's a team of people effectively doing the same thing, but there may be more than one process involved. The easiest one could be sales to customer service or sales to account management handoffs. So you've got a sales individual within a company that's doing everything before the customer buys, which then hand off to someone from an account management point of view to then deliver on the thing that's been sold. And there are various elements of that process, and there are more branches to those processes. They involve more than one person, and they involve potentially more than one system or process. And then where the market, where LinkedIn and where a lot of people speak about and fantasize about a lot of the times is actually kind of like the level 4 piece, which I'm not seeing much of in actual implementation delivered. People are now leveraging these things, and those are your multiplayer, multi-function processes. And this is actually looking at an entire business function, an entire team, all of the individual systems, processes, or work that happens in that team, and then thinking, okay, how can we just rewrite why this function even exists, why this department exists? So probably a long way of me trying to visualize kind of like that ladder of maturity in terms of what I'm seeing in the market. But it's one of those things where everybody speaks about it as level 4. Everybody speaks about as if they're ready for the transformation, they've delivered the transformation, they're getting all of the juice out of this machine. Very rarely do we actually see that in practice, because it takes so many different steps to get up there.
Yeah. I think my reflections on what you said, in the automation space, automation is now, I wouldn't say it's sexy, but it's like, you know, accessible. And part of the reason for that is in the old days, you know, setting up an API used to be a lot of work, and now it's like 10 seconds worth of work, right? So that whole area of connectivity, of integration, has been enabled by the AI revolution, because now everybody wants to do that kind of thing. And that means that things like automation and orchestration are now very accessible. You have the platforms that can do that kind of thing. And as we go through the levels, I think I am seeing a sort of the finance example that you gave. I did something similar for a client like this week maybe, which is an end-to-end sort of invoice processing system. Zero AI. And that's one of the big messages, that this automation stuff, you can do a lot with automation without even using AI. And lots of folks will go down this LLM bandwagon and say, no, we need to use an LLM for everything. You know, we need to look at an invoice, we're going to use an LLM. And it's like, fine, you got money to burn, go off and do it, right? But you're introducing error and risk without needing to. That kind of the understanding of where you need automation and where you need reasoning capability, I think I'm not really seeing that in the market at the moment. The other thing that I think is a huge disservice to the AI revolution, and I know I say this a lot, and I know nobody so far has sued me for this, but Microsoft have done a massive disservice to the entire AI revolution by calling their co-pilots agents. when frankly they are chatbots at best. And it's ludicrous to me that they've managed to get away with this for so long. And part of the terminology side of things is everybody thinks they're doing agentic because they bought a Copilot license, which is ludicrous and ridiculous at the same time.
Yeah.
And on the other side, because it's so easy to buy a Copilot license, what I'm seeing is, and what many companies have done this, is we're going to buy Copilot for everybody or for a bunch of people because we can just click a button and buy it. And now everybody's got Copilot. So we've done AI. We've done it. We're agentic, right? And then we'll go off and tell all of the shareholders that we're now an agentic first company. And of course, Microsoft are going to push this because they're making money from the licenses. But that kind of thinking means two things. One is there's a false sense of an inflated sense of where people are on the maturity spectrum because they think they've done agentic. But the other side of it is it becomes very restrictive because IT teams, for governance reasons, will say, we've implemented Copilot. That's it. You can't implement anything else. And there are legitimate use cases for going outside of the Copilot space, right? Copilot doesn't do everything. It does. I mean, I don't use it because I don't think it does anything that I need it to do. But I imagine the companies somewhere are getting some value out of it. I mean, I don't think that's the case because too many people are complaining about poor adoption. And if it was truly useful, there wouldn't be poor adoption. So I think there's a lot of stuff in that space to unpack. But I think that whole terminology versus being easy to buy versus not being terribly useful versus not having any particularly strong strategic use cases, I think that whole area has muddied the water for this kind of maturity model where we go from automation through to agents. What do you think?
Huge thing. I mean, we both serve the L&D industry, and the biggest connection I could think of was almost the whole skills agenda piece that's been taking the world of L&D over. It's like the amount of companies I've spoken to in the past, for all the viewers out there, I left the L&D industry. I've turned my back on the game. I'm just not having the fun that I want to have, and I'm having far much more fun outside of L&D. But over the last 10 years, I mean, or the last 5 years specifically, I mean, the number of organizations that said they're either involved in a skills transformation or they are now a skills-based organization. And their definition of that was they had an LMS or an LXP or a HR system that now has a skills taxonomy. And let's be honest, a skills taxonomy is just a big database with lots of words in it that are defined as skills and potentially some descriptive words around it about what that skill enables people to do or what allows people to do. The deployment strategy is then let's tag content and consumption to a skill. And once someone's completed it, they can tell us how they feel. And if they feel they're now an expert, they're now an expert. It's almost that again, but for the, but for the rest of the business. We've switched on Copilot. Copilot has a little button on the side that says agents. That means I'm talking to an agent. That means anything I do is leveraging AI agents. So when it gives me an email draft or it rewrites my Word document or it helps me, improve a paragraph in my PowerPoint deck, fantastic. I'm now an AI enabled worker and I'm leveraging agents at the cutting edge, which we both know isn't true. So here's the interesting one. Something for the viewers. Ash, like he said, we've been good friends for a few years. Ash is probably the leading person in the industry that I come to as a friend, but also in the industry around his opinions, where he is, what he's doing, what he's actually rolling his sleeves up and playing with. And much of that, even I'd say before it was cool, before Claude Cowork, everybody was using Cowork and Claude Code and Codex and these kind of things. Ash was already in the terminal, writing code, engineering solutions before it became the cool, easy thing that everybody's now doing. I only very recently, and I say very recently, it's been about 8 months, 9 months that I've been kind of playing and been exposed to the terminal. Never wrote a line of code before that, actively ran away from code anytime I had a project that involved in it. I had people that would do that kind of thing for me. But now what I'm finding is what I can actually leverage AI for and agents for through this black box that's called the terminal or through a CLI is the difference between what I can do in the terminal or what Ash and what serious experts in AI can do working within the terminal, leveraging AI and agents in the way that we do, is it's not even the same thing. Like, it's a completely different planet. It's a completely different league to what, unfortunately, the vast majority of people have in the workforce within the enterprise, even if they were using Copilot or enterprise licenses of GPT and those kind of things. So what you have within an organization is almost And this is so funny that when one of the things I do for a lot of clients is run audits and discovery sprints to even just uncover, right, okay, what are the bottlenecks that are holding your business back? Where could automation, AI or agents help improve some of those things? So when I'm conducting interviews and surveys with the leadership team, with execs, with teams, with across the board, the level of insight around not only their problems, but where they think the solutions could be with AI or with agents. And then you have that same conversation with someone in engineering, with the CIO, with someone in IT that, again, has been playing with these tools for probably years at home anyway. It's just such a different conversation, even though we're asking the same questions and we're talking about the same things. A technical leader said something to me about a week ago. Yeah, I could share this because I'm not going to tell you who it is. Said something to me about a week ago, which was effectively to the extent of, I just let the business think that they're using AI. I let the business think that they're experts in AI and they know how to make decisions and they know how to do anything. Because ultimately, I hold the keys. So when they want to actually implement something at scale, it has to come through me. And at that point, I then become the risk gate to say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Did you know we already had these things? Did you know it's actually not compliant for our use cases? Did you know we don't have the data architecture or the data pipelines in place to actually set this thing up? Just because you've got an Excel table doesn't now mean that you can rag everything, all the kind of things. And to
Yeah.
him, it was almost like a funny comment born out of frustration, which was, I'll let the business think they're doing AI and they're making decisions about AI, but ultimately, I don't really need to worry about them because they've got to go through me anyway. So this almost this, I don't even know what the right phrase is, but having this anchor in the business that is a true expert hopefully will become not a blocker, but actually the adoption safeguard to actually implementing the right solutions at the right time.
Mm.
And I think,
Uh,
God,
I mean, I wonder if that's a little bit, let the business play, let the business develop skills, but not necessarily let them spend lots of money, time, effort, and resources and things going off and doing something that, isn't going to be useful or compliant. I mean, reflections on a couple of things. So we've got the whole skills-based organization. I think my reflection on this from it now is slightly different to what it was maybe a year ago. But my reflection about a year ago was this was basically a meaningless hierarchy of garbage that every organization wanted to come forward and say they were doing because they don't have anything more meaningful to do in the space of human resources or how they are managing the workflows around building talent or thinking about learning, right? We need to target this in some way, somehow launch a massive campaign to gather one more data point so we can now say that this stuff is more targeted. And in terms of data ecology, skills are meaningless. They don't really relate to anything else in the learning data space. That was a year ago. Now, I think slightly differently because now we have the concept of machine skills. And a lot of what I'm doing is hybrid workforce architecture. So where do you have carbon-based workers? Where do you have digital silicon-based workers, so synthetic workers, the digital agents that we have versus the human workers? And one of the things, going back to what you were saying about what we're doing in this space, we're playing with cutting edge tech, we're mobilizing it, we're making it work for real outcomes. And I can pretty much tell when I'm out on the conference circuit, when I'm talking to other people who may claim to be thought leaders or whatever, people who put out videos. I saw one this morning by somebody. There are certain things that they say which are basically triggers for revealing themselves as incompetent. And those things are, for example, AI is not about replacing people. AI is about augmenting people and freeing them up for critical thinking and problem solving. That whole talking point reveals that person as somebody who is playing in the Copilot and ChatGPT space. If they were playing in the fully agentic space, so agents, workflows, multiple integrated systems via MCPs and APIs, things that are effectively crunching lots of processes that used to span different departments and now don't need to because they can be done in one single place. Once you've seen that, once you've used that, once you've weaponized that, once you've seen the outputs and the outcomes of that, there's no going back. And that talking point about augmenting people and not replacing people, the moment you have an automation that is zero touch, that goes, take the invoice processing thing. People are looking at invoices, processing them down multiple different paths. The moment you see that done once, end to end, no human involvement at all, that's when you go, you know what? That replaces a role, that replaces an activity, that replaces a task, and that is tangible and you cannot escape it. So when I hear these talking points, and it usually goes alongside this skills-based stuff, I really think that those people are revealing themselves as the lowest common denominator in the tidal wave of mediocrity that we're now calling thought leadership on LinkedIn. And that is atrocious because I know people out there who are budget holders are listening to these folks and going, you know what? If we all just had a license for Copilot, we would somehow radically change our productivity. And to some degree, I think, well, the whole software license piece where one person buys a license for one thing and they use that license or don't because, adoption of Copilot is notoriously terrible. So one person has a license for one thing and they use it in their browser and they somehow expect productivity gains from that. I think that's massively fallacious because, you were never going to get productivity gains from just sprinkling an additional cost layer onto your workforce. The agentic and automation space is massively different. You can get cost savings, you can get throughput gains, you can get productivity boosts from zero touch infrastructure. So I think a lot of these things are revealing players in the market to me in a way that, I now know what you know and I know your limitations, and it's going to be a blocker because normal distribution of capabilities, it's going to be a blocker when the mean of the population all thinks at a very low level of maturity. You've laid out 5 levels. If the mean of the population is all thinking in level 1, level 4 and 5 organizations are going to have a huge competitive advantage. What do you think about that in the spirit of capitalism?
Hasn't that always been the case? There's always been fewer people at the edge of that distribution curve that are actually the top 2%. I mean, Pareto's law, the 80-20 principle, I mean, all of these kinds of things have always rang this type of thing through. So it doesn't really matter what discipline, what angle, what area that we're talking about. In my opinion, that's always going to exist. And there's always going to be people with an unfair competitive advantage due to sometimes just access, knowledge, and information. Other times due to experience and because they've rolled the sleeves up and they actually can see the patterns and the writing on the wall before it lands and hits. I think the appetite. So I think what's slightly more worrying to me is I think right now everybody still thinks it's a level playing field. I think everybody still thinks everybody else is also still trying to figure things out.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these market leaders, a lot of the top 5%, 10% of the market, they really understand what they're doing. They're really actually remodeling their businesses. They're really letting go of people, reskilling people, or reallocating people resources in specific ways.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff happens behind the scenes. We don't really see much of that stuff out in the public, out in the wild. We don't see the case studies. We're not seeing a lot of this stuff being written about. All we actually see is the other end of the market, the times when things go bad, the times when one of the big 4 consultancies leaves AI slop all over their reports and it clearly says blah blah blah. So it's almost this balancing act of can you read between the lines and get a grasp of reality? And a lot of that sometimes can be limited by who you know, not necessarily what you know. Do you know someone that's actually playing at the frontier, that's actually done some of these things, that's actually in the boardrooms making these decisions, that's done the evaluations, that's done the planning, that's done the thinking? Versus, are you one of the herd that thinks that now because Claude desktop app has released channels or managed agents that you now no longer need to think about anything, or because you see agents in Copilot, you now don't need to do anything? The level of information and who we're speaking to makes a huge difference into the actual outcome of that conversation, the thought, and those kind of things. Thing that I try and get people to think about is, so if we were to level the playing field, and if we were to get people considering and thinking about these things in the right way, or how they should be done based on our thoughts of best practice and our thoughts of good judgment, it's around, right, okay, let's forget about AI for a moment. Let's just completely forget those 2 letters exist. Let's forget about what we're doing. What are we actually solving for in the business? And this is, the very, very old question and a very, very old thing to be thinking about. But it's, what are we actually solving for? Why are we solving for this? Do you even understand the depth of the thing that you're about to touch? And then from that point, usually, and I spend a lot of time in the innovation space, but when you talk about improving anything, like there are only 4 ways that anything can be improved. You either delete something, you either add something new, you either do more of what's already working, or you improve an existing process. Those are the only 4 things that you've got that anybody can do to improve anything. We often forget about the removing of things within change. So we think if we add something, it must be better, it must be faster, it must get better. So we throw more and more tools and processes and even people at things that we want to improve within a business and think the net result of that should be this will get better. Just throwing AI on top of, throwing Microsoft Copilot on top of a bad process, bad planning, unrealistic expectations does more harm than good. So when we talk about then deconstructing why the work even exists, or why workflows exist, or why processes exist, that's some of the level where then we can start talking about the, in my opinion, the big thing that makes the most difference, which is context. And then we talk about, you just mentioned agent skills and how you're now developing machine skills for agents and for machines to use and leverage. It's the exact same thing from a contextual point of view. Everybody in the AI space says AI needs data, it needs context, you've got to feed it as much information as possible. But what happens when even the humans don't have the context or the information? And it's that balancing act of, this could be a brilliant solution in the finance department, but let me give you 10 reasons why that won't work in legal or that won't work in sales. And it's almost that deterministic versus probabilistic nature of what we're trying to achieve. But again, going to a HR leader, going to a learning leader, going to change makers, for want of a better word, within organizations that are probably looking at this from an agenda point of view, how many of those even understand what we mean by deterministic versus probabilistic solutions or software or outputs? Probably not a lot.
I mean, it's a good question, right? Because I would imagine, looking at you L&D people, I would imagine that we've all been banging on about AI literacy programs for the last 2 or 3 years. And I think every organization that I talk to has done something in the AI literacy space. So if those programs have been invested in and rolled out to the extent that it seems that they have, then I would say every single person in every single workforce should know the difference between probabilistic and deterministic. Is that
And the key
likely true?
the filter is something that you said earlier on, which is the amount of problems that can be solved purely with automation. No AI automation. Just simple triggers, processes, and execution, for want of a better word, and obviously some integration. But do people even understand automation versus agentic automation or agentic workflows? And
So
where are they
if you're
making these decisions from?
Well, if you're watching this and you're in a learning team and you've done your AI literacy program and everybody understands what a large language model is now, how much of your program, how much of your efforts were or have been centered around the concept of orchestration, the concept of workflows, the concept of pulling together different triggers and pulling together things into a database, consolidating knowledge bases, having repeatable processes, systems thinking, all of this stuff, which is basically bread and butter in the automation space. Is this something that you're thinking about? Put your comments down below. But yeah, I think that whole area is neglected. It's like the, third poor child who doesn't get any of the attention, right? And yet, for me, it's the most interesting space because for me, reproducible zero touch processes are probably not, I wouldn't say half of what I do, but certainly in my business, the reproducible workflow thing is very heavily used. The other side of it, the agentic side, is most useful for, I guess, two things. One is where you need multiple reasoning steps in the same workflow. So you might be generating something, validating content, you might be putting some multimodal design around it, etc., etc. And the other thing is bringing a whole load of different processes together. So, as an example, and this might be relevant to the salespeople, but maybe it's relevant to learning as well. I don't know. Let's find out. I have a call with a stakeholder, and that stakeholder wants a proposal around a specific thing. I have an integration with my AI note taker. I have agents that can read the transcript the moment it's logged, can pick up from my knowledge base what my service list is, what my pricing strategy and structure is, and can pull together with my branding and my template a proposal in a PowerPoint if that's what I choose, but also writing that proposal to knowledge base and critically also writing to my CRM what the next deal is. All of that in one process was previously very difficult. Now it all happens within the space of about 10 minutes. So that's, for me, that's how I'm using the difference between something like agents and something like automation. Are you using it in basically the same way? How are you seeing it play out?
Pretty much. So I don't know if this is because of my ethnic background, but I don't like spending money where I don't need to spend money. And I don't like making mistakes if I don't need to make mistakes. So there are kind of two sides of that coin, which is number one, how can I simplify the work that I'm doing? I like to feel productive. I like to feel like I've had a good day's work. I like to feel that when I spend 45 minutes writing an email or reading some research or producing something, that I'm being effective and I'm making the use of my time and I'm doing hard work. In actual fact, the majority of the work that we do is fairly simple if you actually break it down. And this is some of the workflow versus jobs and tasks type of conversation, which we'll probably move on to. So my first job is, before I try and change or improve or add agents or AI to anything, is almost, right, can I write this down in the simplest way possible so that almost anyone that can at least speak English or read English can understand and follow these steps? It's just an instruction manual. I'm going to throw a word out here that the learning colleagues will love and probably not understand the context I'm going to use it in. But when we talk about compliance, that's almost the first step in what we're trying to achieve. Can something, a machine or a human, follow, comply with this list of directives or this list of instructions? Press this button to turn your machine on. When that machine's on, you'll find a bar, type something in the bar, click enter, go and press this button. Can it just follow instructions? And can I simplify that instruction so anybody can pick it up? At that point, then, you're in the best case possible to then understand the actual outcome and what goes into delivering that outcome. Okay, actually, this doesn't need any reasoning. 99% of the times I do X, I'm doing it the same way. As long as I can write down what that way is, I can probably not need AI in most cases. Where there are then branches, variations, where things can change, where things need reasoning, where I almost make a judgment call within my own process. Should I use X or should I use Y? Okay, how do I come to that conclusion? Based on previous patterns of work that I've done and also based on the outcome that I'm trying to achieve and my own mini workflow. At those points, then you can probably start thinking, okay, actually, could an LLM help me here? Is an LLM actually needed here? Versus if I just want emails to be logged and my inbox to look nice and pretty, I don't need AI to do that. That can be an automation and it can follow tags and it can follow scripts. But if I want a solution to completely manage my inbox, so I don't need to pay my VA over in the Philippines and I don't need to spend 3 hours a day replying and filing emails, then at that point, I probably need some judgment and some reasoning, which is number one, can the human or the machine infer the meaning, categorize the input of an email that lands in my inbox, and then take one of many actions to do something with that as an output? Either reply with a concise reply, either ask follow-up questions, either provide them with more information, generate a proposal and a meeting invite, look for calendar. There's a lot of possibilities that could go on. And it's almost that kind of really simplistic filter that I use to think, okay, is this just an automation, which is fairly cheap? $20 a month is what it costs me for an automation platform. And I can almost automate 80% of the things that I used to previously think and take pride in what I did, versus okay, now I need an agent or a human to do something. And that's kind of like the lens I think about it in. Is this something that I would want or I would have needed a human to do 2 years ago? If it is, then can I weigh the pros and cons, or what are the benefits of picking an agent over a human? And there are a lot of different things that go in there. But that's kind of the filter that I use.
So I'm going to go a step further with that, and that is that, I mean, yeah, very similar. The reason I'm going to go a step further is I used to also work in safety and security and business continuity and a bunch of other support services. And nearly always you could tell apart the people who had expertise in that space from the people who didn't, because they would use the C word. They would talk about compliance. You must do this thing because there's somewhere there's a regulation, a policy, standard operating procedure, something that says you have to do it. I'm not going to try and explain the reasons. I'm just going to tell you have to. Now, in big companies, sometimes they will have, for example, particularly regulated companies, they might have a quality management system, and that has standard operating procedures. And it means that people must go and do things according to effectively an algorithm. Here's a process that you're going to follow. You're going to do step one, then you're going to do step two. And I will go so far as to say the statistic that I have not validated or verified in the slightest, but I'm going to put it out there anyway, is if you've got a quality management system that has a bunch of standard operating procedures that tell people to go and do things like a machine where they don't have any judgment or any critical thinking involved, they're just slavishly following a process, then 100% of all of those processes can be automated. And what's the implication of that for the workforce? Because go back to, it's not about replacing people, it's about augmenting them and freeing their time up for innovative thinking and all of this, right? I once, was it a client, was it a company I worked for? Can't remember. But at one point in my life, there was a department of 400 people somewhere in a business. Their entire job was an email comes into this inbox, they read the email, and they say, does it need to go to this other inbox, this other inbox, or that other inbox, right? So basically comes in, triage it. You've got three separate inboxes it goes to, and then somebody at that end probably also reads it and tries to filter it and send it back. So that was the entire reason for being for that one department of 400 people. Now, are we really going to stand around and say, it's not about replacing people? Because I think we know, and pretty much everybody at this level of the AI revolution or the agentic revolution should understand that reading an email and figuring out who you're going to forward it to is not a job, or it should never have been a job, though. That's the thing. Now, what you're saying about, where we maybe needed a person, you know, 2, 3, 5 years ago versus now, I think for a long time, particularly in very big companies, there have been a lot of people who were doing things that probably we never needed a human to do. And that's the tricky thing, because when we're talking about the whole AI thing, really what we're saying is we're getting an increased level of scrutiny around jobs that really probably shouldn't have existed anyway. And that's a tough message to land, particularly to people who have been doing something for 30 years, right? Let's pick on our beloved e-learning studios, right? Where you've got in a big company or maybe an offshore agency or something, and you know what, we're going to make a RISE course out of this. Amazing, right? That's clearly something that needs a lot of insight and needs a lot of human involvement. It isn't, right? We're just talking about packaging some text up and some images into a particular format. That is 100% automatable. You can do that with some agents. So why did we have people doing this in the first place? And saying that this was like some kind of really difficult, protected profession with lots of, specialist expertise. What was the thing that allowed us to say this for 15 or 20 years versus just saying, you know what, that's something that we can automate? And we never bothered. What's that about? What do you think?
So there's a funny line that gets thrown around a lot of the times. I'm going to say we're not talking about the L&D profession here. We're talking about sports coaching here. So one of the things that a lot of people say about coaches is that they were failed athletes, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the people that couldn't perform at the highest of levels that then almost default into the coaching arena. I'm obviously not saying that about L&D, facilitators, trainers, the rest of it. But if we just talk about a discipline like sales and we think about, okay, is the top salesperson in a team the right person to become a manager of that team or a trainer of that team? Probably not, right? Because it's a different skill set. There's a different behavior system. There's a different DNA to that type of person to the one that is nurturing, growing, developing, coaching, and those kind of things. Alongside that, I think then there has been the easiest filter or categorization mechanism between Yousaf is bad at training or delivering training. Ashwin is amazing at training and coaching people. Why is that? Okay, there's now a discipline, or there's a discipline called instructional design. Does Yousaf know how to design instructions or to delegate actions and information to a group of people, as well as Ashwin that may be using a framework of some kind or of some sort? And I think that was one of the, I could be completely wrong. I mean, I wasn't around back then, but I think that might have been one of the things that kind of brought about some of these roles. Sometimes I think it's just purely comes down to opinion and feelings, which isn't logical and can't be measured a lot of the times. But it's almost like, why does any business still have teams of facilitators on their roster?
Yeah.
If all they're going to do is stand up and deliver slides or deliver experiences, and experiences and slides and content and knowledge can be bought as well as designed, as well as outsourced, as well as automated and taken over by agents and everything else, why do companies still employ large rosters of facilitators or trainers to just stand in front of classrooms or virtually stand in front of cameras and deliver training. A lot of
I
that
think
just
there,
comes down to the root of people want the experience of being spoken to rather
yeah.
than just consuming ones and zeros or consuming videos and reading.
So I think there are two parts to it, right? One is exactly what you said. The second part is that a lot of companies will have, particularly in the regulated space, will have a hesitance to change something that has satisfied the regulator or the auditor for a long time. So we have this person stands up and reads off the slides. Everybody signs the sheet. They give the little satisfaction thing. We were happy with the sandwiches and the cakes and whatever. And then we can put that piece of paper in front of a regulator and it works. Why do we need to change it? So I think there's a hesitation from a company side as well, and that also contributes towards this. But this is the kind of thing that gets in the way of progress. And we have the same discussion with AI. That is, what is the burden of proof when we say, well, this particular thing is going to be slightly better or slightly worse? How are we actually testing it? Because a lot of times we haven't really tested what human capability is. We've just assumed we stand the trainer up in front of a class, and that's cool. And we're getting the efficacy benefits. And if we're not, then it must be, something to do with a particular trainer or particular classroom or maybe a particular student. So we'll attribute those kinds of things to success or failure in a particular area. It's more worrying now because we have a tech revolution. In a tech revolution, we're going to have a bunch of people who are struggling to find what they're going to do with their next steps in their career. And it's going to be way easier for people to go into a people discipline than it is for them to go into a data or a tech discipline. A lot of people are scared by data. A lot of people are scared by tech. It used to be cool to say that, people were bad at maths. So, particularly in the West. Now, what are they going to do? Well, they're all just going to run off and be coaches, right? Because there's no barrier to entry to being a coach. Anybody can be a coach. I'm a coach right now because I just said it. It's the whole I declare bankruptcy thing from The Office, right? So it's that, right? I declare I'm a coach. Amazing. I'm now a coach. And when you were saying earlier about like, are these really, the concept of failed athletes versus the whole L&D bit? Well, I think we have a risk in front of us, and it's not necessarily that I said this a lot in season one that, you've got a lot of people in the L&D industry who just fell into it by accident, right? They used to be a lawyer and, they came to the end of their useful life as a lawyer and they were golfing with the CEO and he said, go run the training department. You're a good egg. Why don't you go and do that? And they've now stood up in front of young lawyers with a PowerPoint slide that they didn't even make. They got somebody else to make for like probably 20 years. And now somehow we're going to credit those people with a deep understanding of the pedagogic literature. It's never going to happen, right? But you've got that side of things in the whole instructional design space, which annoys me. But the other thing is, I had a call with somebody. When was it? It was maybe 2, 3 months ago. Who was an instructional designer and who put time in my diary just for um, talking about AI. So, can I find out more about AI, etc., etc.? And I did talk a little bit about what meta-analyses in the scientific literature have been revealing about which pedagogic choices yield to better learning outcomes, so cognitive, motivational, or behavioral outcomes, and why we should be using the scientific literature, which is multiple studies across multiple geographies, across multiple modalities, massive sample sizes. You've got all of this stuff to rely on, 40 years of literature. And the guy was looking at me blankly, like, what are you even talking about? Because so many, I do mean many, instructional designers out there are media designers who've been employed as instructional designers. So what they know is how to make a pretty picture that satisfies a particular stakeholder because the stakeholder goes, that looks shiny. I like that. Everybody claps, right? Everybody has a little round of drinks and says, we did amazing work. We made a nice, pretty picture. But from a pedagogic standpoint, it's meaningless. So I think there are these little complicating factors in whether or not we have expertise and efficacy in a particular profession. There's all of these combinations and probably a bunch of other things, politics and why are we keeping this person on? Because we lose the headcount if we get rid of them, and we need to spend the budget by the end of the year, so we're going to buy this tool, and all of that kind of stuff that happens in businesses yields this landscape of mediocrity to which we assume that agents are going to be the panacea. And that is probably also not true because the agentic revolution most likely is going to be treated with the same level of apathy and the same level of mediocrity as we saw with instructional design. Thoughts?
Another train of thought, and I think the first thing my head went to is when you spoke about And it's not just L&D we're talking about here, but when you talk about the split between the future of roles or skills or potential required versus how organizations sit today. So no, for the majority of cases, most L&D folk aren't going to become software engineers or coders or maths geniuses overnight, and probably not in time ready for the agentic revolution, which we're already in. And that took my brain to another place, which was, okay, how do we evaluate models today? And how do we evaluate, LLMs and AI and systems at the moment? And the way models are evaluated are through maths and through coding or engineering. And these are deterministic, outcome-based, evaluations. Can it do the thing? Can't it do the thing? Was it right? Was it wrong? How many times did we run the test? And how many times did it get it right versus getting it wrong? When we changed these inputs, what changed in the outputs? What changed in the black box of processing or thinking? But when we talk about the human side of businesses within an L&D department and what L&D professionals do, how much of their output is also deterministic? Probably very little, right? 3 instructional designers, 3 e-learning developers, 3 facilitators can all design the same content, training, deliver the same slides in their own way. But what math or engineering or laws are they using to actually evaluate the success of the output of what those people do or produce? There aren't any. Unless I'm getting something wrong, there aren't any. There are frameworks that people use to give them guides around how to do their inputs or their processing. But there aren't really any frameworks from an output point of view outside of the accessibility space, which isn't a learning thing. That's just a global standards thing. So when we think about people using ADDIE as an instructional design technique or as a content design technique, what is the equivalent standard from an output point of view that everybody in the world agrees upon, that this is the one standard that we use to evaluate the quality of learning content or knowledge outputs or deliverables that have been produced versus the consumption that somebody has taken away, i.e., how much have people learned as a result of this action? That doesn't exist.
So they've got the whole Kirkpatrick thing, right? Which is, a pyramid of how good the sandwiches were, and everything stops above that. I think there are, and this is back to, my scathing indictment of the capabilities that I see and I have seen over the many years in the industry. Is there a framework out there? I don't know. There's lots of literature out there which tells us what different choices should yield in terms of efficacy and what the conditions should be for those choices. There's plenty of that stuff out there. Has anybody consolidated it into a modern framework? Probably not. I mean, maybe we could get Claude to do it before the next time we meet. So I think that's entirely possible. Even if we did it, and this is my concern, in the modern day when, I'm not going to get unnecessarily political here, but in the modern day, I suspect even if we had a fully scientifically backed, literature backed framework that gave choices and when you should make those choices and effectively a flowchart, we'd still get more than half of the industry saying, you know what, I've been a trainer for 5 years and I think it should be done this way because I know best, blah, 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 right? And the almost the arrogance of people to willfully ignore the literature that is in front of them, to willfully ignore 40 or 50 years of data when they're making some of these choices, means that I don't think a framework would be helpful.
So I agree with you. And where I was going with this was that because there's no deterministic evaluation model for the outputs of what learning and learning folk produce or deliver, by nature, there isn't one that exists specifically for AI or agents in that same capacity within those domains. When one is produced, then it's absolutely something that's 100% automatable, indisputable. Doesn't really matter how long Susie has been delivering training for the last 23 years. Her feelings can't argue with facts and laws or logic or measurement or numbers or quality outputs if we all agree on what those things are. The other way to then think about it is if there is no agreement in what good looks like, because it's so opinion based, then at that point, why are we already bound by rules or frameworks like SCORM, like e-learning, like a learning management system for the deployment of those things within the organization already? So the argument has always been that all of the knowledge has already existed on the internet, in Google, on YouTube forever. Why do we need the learning team? Or would anybody even notice if we turn the LMS off? And outside of that one compliance tracking checkbox use case,
Yes.
it doesn't exist. But the people that are involved in that space of the market, in the world, in the organization, also haven't leveled up or adapted their thinking beyond the sandbox that they're playing in. They're
Yeah.
still playing with the same toys they were playing with 10 years ago, 20 years ago. They're just now made slightly better quality. They just look a bit nicer. They're a bit easier to use. No one has actually thought about, okay, let's throw the LMS, e-learning, Kirkpatrick, Happy Sheets in the bin, and let's actually work backwards from the problem we're trying to solve, which is effectively performance or compliance in another route, and working backwards from there. So
Yeah.
something that I saw you post about recently on LinkedIn was systems thinking. I don't think many people know how, doesn't matter how many blog posts you read or what you viewed online, I don't think any people or many people actually understand what systems thinking actually is and why it's such a important, vital skill that anybody now needs in the AI for the future world, which is the ability to at least understand what you're looking at. A system is a technical word now, but it's effectively just a collection of things that are relatable and that all affect each other. But you draw conclusions between inputs, processes, and outputs in the same way that we map workflows and work and automations and those kind of things. Can a CLO, can a learning leader, can a HR leader understand what their performance systems look like within their own business to think, okay, we've got a directive, or we've been told that people need communications training or people need AI training. What does good look like as the outcome first? And how do we reverse engineer from there? But equally, what else goes into this outside of just simply knowledge or consuming information? Okay, people need new toys to play with. People need access to safe places that they can work and break things. People need simulated or dummy data. We need better InfoSec infrastructure to make sure that nobody can upload a hugely sensitive document to a public LLM. And I don't think enough people are thinking about, I don't think people are thinking differently enough to
Yeah.
be able to drive all of the change that most people agree that we should be making.
Yeah, I think my default and your default, I know as well, is that whenever I have to do something, doesn't matter how trivial that thing is, I will spend the time to make sure that I never ever have to do that thing again. So I will build the system while I'm doing that thing. And it's a default behavior. So I've got a task that takes 10 minutes to do. It's worth my time spending 2 hours to automate it. And that way I never have to do it again. So this is the mindset around systems thinking. It's not only about how you do systems thinking and systems engineering, but it's also having the attitude to actually go and do that for nearly everything that your life touches. So on that bombshell, as Jeremy Clarkson would say, we have reached time. So I'm sure we're going to do another one of these, and Yousaf will, of course, be back to not only entertain you all, but also to drop pearls of wisdom all over the L&D and related industries, because now we're not only playing in the L&D space. So if you're watching this on Spotify, don't forget to follow the channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe. Something about bell buttons and notifications, of course. Go and have a look on Instagram if you want to see daily reels. But if you want to see the reels coming out amongst a bunch of other articles and posts and things, then obviously check this out on LinkedIn. Yousaf, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks a lot.
And yeah, we've kicked off season 2. Join us on the next episode.